Hello there. We're talking about the Great Depression again today, and we'll be talking, at least in this class, about both essential questions that we've talked about so far, which include the questions of what causes change in economics and how do depressions affect society. In particular, when we're talking about what causes change in economics, we're going to be talking about things like banks and public works like the Hoover Dam that you can see up here in the upper right-hand corner. And we're going to be talking about protests. In particular, we're going to be talking about two different protests. The Bonus March, which you can see protesters here in this picture up on the left, and the Hunger March. And really what is going to be coming our way is questions of whether or not Americans are going to even promote things like revolution. And when confronted with this kind of effect on our society, the president is going to have to respond to try and change the way the Depression is impacting all of America. So we'll take a look at those things today, and let's get down to brass. I want to start with how Hoover, as President of America, is going to try and promote recovery. Now, understand this, that Hoover is going to want to get Americans back to work, and to do that, he's going to have to encourage someone to spend money. Remember that when we talk about our economy, the whole thing functions on a couple of different ideas. Number one, people have to spend money. And number two, people have to have higher wages to continue to spend money. If either of these things don't happen, then our economy over time is not going to work. So Hoover, knowing that there just isn't enough money out there for people to spend on their own, and certainly with 1 out of every 4 Americans unemployed, they're not getting higher wages, so he's going to have to come up with ways to put Americans back to work himself. The government is going to have to spend money to get the economy moving again, at least in Hoover's eyes. So to do that, he wants to fund what he's going to call public works. These building projects that are funded by the government, like highways and parks and libraries and sewer systems and dams and all kinds of things. But to do that, remember that Hoover believes in laissez-faire economies. He does not want the government to get too involved in regulating or even promoting the economy. And at the same time, since he's a believer in laissez-faire economy, Hoover does not like debt at all. So to pay for these public works projects that are going to create jobs, Hoover has to either do one of two things. He's either going to have to raise taxes and bring taxes higher and higher, or, right, because that would have to, pay for the loan somehow, or he's going to have to take another approach, and that approach is perhaps even more dangerous, at least as someone who believes in laissez-faire economics, and that is going to be going into debt, whether it's by taking out loans as the government, whether it's by taking on credit as the government, whatever it might happen to be. He's either going to have to do the taxes or taking on more debt. And Hoover worries here, rightfully so, that if the government raises taxes to pay for public works, then you and I are going to have less money in our pockets to spend. That's going to hurt business, and the Depression won't end. But he also believes that if he tries to, instead of raising taxes, take on these loans and take out these credits, then it's the government borrowing money. Instead of giving out money to businesses, banks will be giving money to the government. And we know already that there's not a lot of money in the economy to begin with. So why would the government take on that money when businesses need it for sure? Hoover settles on two different solutions to the problem of the Great Depression in trying to rescue banks and businesses. Now remember that both banks were closing. Over 1,000 banks had closed by 1932, and that 30,000 businesses were closing by 1933 in America. So Hoover is going to try and rescue those collapsing banks and those businesses. To help the banks, he creates the National Credit Corporation, and its goal is going to try and rescue banks by allowing them to continue lending that money in their communities, but unfortunately, not enough money was given to the banks to keep them from collapsing. And the other program that Hoover is going to put in place to help bankrupt businesses is going to be the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Originally, its design was to make loans to businesses. It does end up helping banks, but it's businesses at first that it's designed to help. But again, it's going to fail because it doesn't lend enough money to businesses to keep them from going bankrupt. Let me show you what I mean. This graphic here is the amount of money in billions of dollars that's available in the American economy during the Great Depression. So you can see there's quite a lot of money if you look here, right, at the top of this chart, right, in 1926, 27, 28, 29, quite a lot of money in the economy. But then when the Depression happens, you can see what occurs, right? If you look at that, you're able to see that there's a drop-off in 1930 as people start withdrawing money from the banks, people start losing money in savings, and then the drop-off continues until it gets to the 1932, 1933, and there just isn't enough money in the economy to fill and to make us prosperous, to keep us spending and put Americans back to work. So with this serious drop in amount of money in the economy, Hoover is trying to put the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in play and the National Credit Corporation in play so that the amount of money increases. So that instead of a line down here, the line would be somewhere up here because the National Credit Corporation is making loans to banks, and then the Reconstruction Finance Corporation is making loans to businesses, and with this additional money in the economy, businesses can hire people again and people can begin to spend. But neither of those two activities or those two different programs is going to put enough money back into the economy to keep it from collapsing. So Hoover does make an attempt to rescue businesses or banks, but as you could see from that chart, it's not going to get enough money back into the economy to banks or businesses to keep things going. When it comes to the people themselves, Hoover is going to want to help people, obviously, but what we need to understand here is that Hoover wants states and cities to take care of people instead of the federal government. He does not want the federal government to provide what's popularly called relief, or money given directly to poor families. Think about it like this. Here's your family of people in the Depression that aren't doing well. What Hoover wants are states, like the state of Pennsylvania here, to give them money. Or even their little city, like Manchester. He wants Manchester to give them money. That's their business. In his mind, it's not the business of the federal government of the entire United States to provide that money to that poor family. He would rather see it happen on a local level, because let's not forget that above all, Hoover, right, at its roots, believes in laissez-faire. He does not want the government involved in the economy as much as other people do. So he does not want to see these people get money from the federal government. He's going to then encourage the passing of, and he doesn't want to sign it. He doesn't want to sign it, the Emergency Relief and Construction Act, which will give loans to the states. So the federal government is going to give loans not to individual people directly, but to the states, and that money then goes out to the people. And this really upsets Hoover because, in essence, it's just a different way of saying that we are going to give money to the people as the federal government. And he doesn't want to do it because he believes in laissez-faire. He's really disturbed by this. And the cartoons of the time could show it. Hoover was often depicted in this kind of a mentality, or this kind of a cartoon, where he's facing what is, in essence, really a mountain of problems, but problems with which there's no solution. And it always feels to people that there are even more problems off on the horizon, that the storm clouds of the Great Depression are going to get even worse. And so Hoover, not knowing the best way to solve this problem, because he lives and believes in laissez-faire, is not going to do enough, unfortunately, to rescue the people. And the people are going to let him know about that, with a variety of different public protests that people will engage in the early 1930s. One of the ones that's most surprising are going to be hunger marches. Now, these take place around America, in Washington, D.C., and different cities around the country. But what's interesting about these is that they're organized and promoted in magazines like you see here on the right, the Labor Defender, by the American Communist Party. Now, just 10 years ago, in 1919, 1920, 1921, 22, we were in the middle of a Red Scare. We were conducting the Palmer raids and deporting Russian people. Now, tens of thousands of people are joining riots and protests led by the Communist Party. People are breaking into grocery stores out of anger and frustration. Farmers are destroying their own crops, trying to decrease supply to raise the price, even having to face foreclosure, losing those farms. Nearly 1 million farms are lost because farmers couldn't afford to keep them. People are so frustrated, they're willing to support the group of people who are out there that Americans really never anticipated or ever considered supporting before. Communists. It worries many Americans that there might even be a return or an embrace of communist revolution. What if you have tens of thousands of Americans joining the Communist Party in protests? What next, right? The answer for what next is going to come when World War I veterans protest. The nation won't fall into communism, but the nation will become outraged at Hoover in 1932. World War I veterans, and we have to set this up. Now remember, World War I veterans fought in 1917, right? So it's 1917 that World War I veterans are fighting. And they were promised $1,000 in 1945 as a bonus for their volunteering to fight in 1917. So they fight, they survive, and if they live all the way to 1945, they're going to get $1,000. Well, it's 1932 now, and we're in the middle of the Great Depression, and people are, one out of every four of us are without jobs, banks are closing, we're losing our savings. So these veterans, 15,000 of them, are going to march to Washington, D.C. They're going to camp in Hoovervilles like the one down here on the bottom right. And they're going to protest all throughout the city, demanding to get that money early. In essence, the bonus marchers want to have that money delivered in 1932, not 1945. These World War I veterans, again, who fought in 1917, become known as the bonus marchers because they're marching to get that bonus moved from 1945 to 1932. President Hoover, he refuses and orders the police to clear out those protesters. As you might imagine, when you have a group of World War I veterans, right, the bonus marchers, who are angry and upset and frustrated, and they're told to clear out, and the police are sent to clear them out, you can understand how riots or panic might ensue, and it did. In this image that I put up earlier, you can see the police here on the right trying to clear out those bonus marchers over here on the left who had come to Washington in 1932 looking for that $1,000 early that they were supposed to get. And in the panic, in this clearing out of the bonus marchers, a police officer shoots and kills 2 veterans, and the veterans become enraged. The situation spirals out of control, and Hoover actually has the army come to kick out those veterans. So what you end up seeing here is in July of 1932, the U.S. Army expels the bonus marchers from Washington, D.C. with fixed bayonets and tear gas. This is the American Army. You can see a picture of the American Army right up here in the upper right that I had put on before. The American Army kicking out veterans from Washington, D.C. with fixed bayonets and tear gas. People who had fought and died and were injured and bled for our country were being kicked out of a Capitol with fixed bayonets. This does not play well in the news. You can imagine how the national press across the country covers this. When you see the Army troops assaulting the bonus Army veterans, Hoover's reputation is going to be completely damaged, and it's going to really hurt him as he tries to get re-election in 1932. Because Hoover, right, even though he does more than any other president to try and have the government fix our country's economy, he's still going to fail to solve that crisis, right? And I showed you that image of the money supply in our economy still going down all the way through his presidency in 1932. And because he fails to resolve the economic crisis, and because he's seen as completely and utterly insensitive to Americans when the Army troops assault the bonus Army, his response to the Depression is going to lead to his landslide loss in the 1932 presidential election to a Democrat. And that guy, who we're going to talk a lot about in the next chapter, is this man here, Franklin F. Delano D. Roosevelt, R. And we'll see how the Democrats and FDR are going to try and solve this Great Depression in the next chapter.